Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this week's History is Lunch program. I'm Drew Gardner of the two Mississippi Museums, and we're glad to have you in our home, the Craig H. Neilsen Auditorium in the Museum of Mississippi History and the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. Just go ahead and take a moment right now and silence your cell phones or place them on Do Not Disturb. To all of our folks that are joining us on Facebook and YouTube, we're glad to have you guys with us. Just so you know that we have over 400 of these History's Lunch programs that are available on our MDH video YouTube page, as well as the Mississippi Department of Archives and History Facebook page, so you can see any of those previous programs. Before we begin today's program, I do want to take a moment and just acknowledge the passing of Reverend Ed King this past Saturday, July 4th, at the age of 89. Reverend King was a key figure of the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement and is featured heavily throughout these museums. You'll notice that we have made a quick pivot to a different program this week. We will have Caroline Bain back with us. We are working on another date. There was some unforeseen circumstances that changed her availability today, but we are committed. She will be back to have our Medgar Evers presentation and the story of WLBT. So we will have that program, but we are very thankful today for Shaun Stalzer for stepping in. And so as we continue our America 250 journey, by exploring Mississippi stories and how they've shaped our nation, we are going to dive into the archive with Shaun Stalzer to explore a recently processed collection of 19th century coroner inquests. Shaun is the senior archivist for the government records section at the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. He holds master's degrees in archival science and history from the University of Texas and Texas State University. So please welcome Shaun Stalzer in his presentation, By the Instigation of the Devil, a Survey of Coroner Inquests in Mississippi from 1799 to 1869. Thanks, Drew. Appreciate it.
All right. Can you all hear me okay? All right, good. As Drew said, my name is Shaun. I'm a senior archivist over in the archives next door. I'm here today to talk about a collection of coroner inquests that I processed over a several-year period. There's a lot of interesting stuff in this collection, a lot of documents related to slavery, a lot of unsolved murders, and a lot of violent deaths as well. The dates are a little different on my presentation. So before we talk about the collection itself, it's probably a good idea to focus on just what exactly would happen in one of these inquests during the 19th century. So the first step, of course, is that a suspicious or untimely death occurs in a county. This could be a murder, could be a manslaughter, could be an accidental death such as a drowning, could be a suicide, or it could be a death in the county jail. After 1840, it could also be a death in the state penitentiary known as the Walls. From there, the constable will summon a jury of 24. Usually 12 will only serve. After 1850, they changed the law to only having 6 serving on the inquest jury. But then the next step is that the coroner meets with the jury and swears them in, and they go to view the location of the body. They will look for obvious signs of death, such as gunshot wound, knife wound, blunt force trauma, that kind of a thing. They will interview witnesses to learn more about the cause of death and also more information about the victim, who they were, where they came from, name, age, gender, race, neighbors, family, that kind of a thing. They can talk to a local doctor. So they will get medical expertise from a local doctor, and they can often request a post-mortem examination. They will name any assailants who may have committed a crime, so as a murder or manslaughter, whether it's going to be principals or accessories to the crime. And they try to determine cause of death for all this information, and they write this up into their verdict. Their verdict is usually done, so the inquest is usually done within a day or two of the death, and the verdict is going to be usually pretty brief, usually only a few paragraphs long. So these are not going to be complete court cases with full transcripts and things like that. And they will name any assailants, and all of this information gets wrapped up in the verdict and gets sent to the circuit court, where any trials will begin for the accused. And the final step in the process is everybody gets paid. So the coroner gets $10 per inquest. The other local officials, such as constables and justices of the peace, get $3 to $5. If there is no coroner available in a county, then the JP can fill that void. And then, your medical doctors will get $10 for any postmortem exams that they do, and the jury gets $1.50 for the verdict, for their inquest, plus 6 cents a mile for any travel expenses that they do, which of course would have been much more of a burden back in the 19th century than today. Okay, so the collection. Series 2320 is going to be your series number. That's how you'll find it in our catalog record if you wanted to look at these in person. The date ranges for this collection is 1803 to 1869. The title said 1799, but we'll talk about that in a second. So basically, you're going to get territorial records. Most of this stuff is going to be antebellum documents, and then you'll get a little bit of Reconstruction. There's 6 boxes total of the verdicts, which is really what people want to look at, and then 2 boxes of juror certificates that talk about, how much and how far that the jurors went, how far they traveled. There's over 2,100 unique inquests, and these are financial documents as well as judicial documents, because these are, the officials being paid for their services. Of course, these are not complete records. This isn't going to be every single death in the 19th century. It's not even going to be every violent or suspicious death in the 19th century, because there's a lot that's missing. For whatever reason, we don't have a lot of these inquests in the archives. They just didn't survive over time. And these are, of course, basically the tip of the iceberg in terms of the judicial process. These inquests are happening within a day or two after they die, after the victim dies, and they're not full court cases. There's usually not witness testimonies, so there's not a whole complete discussion of what happened, only what the jurors thought at the time. A few of the documents look like these examples here. So a lot of them are going to be just like receipts. Essentially, it's going to be the constable or the coroner is going to be named, how much they were paid, and the name of the victim. There's no discussion of the cause of death, really, and there's no real narrative there to go off of. Next, we'll have juror per diem on the right there. These are also not going to be very descriptive. They're going to have the juror name, how far they've traveled, and how much they were paid for their service. They won't usually even list the cause of death. They'll name the victim, but not actually the cause of death. The verdicts are the sweet spot. It's what everybody's going to want to look at. Usually these are going to be a paragraph or 2 in length, and they'll explain what the jury believed was the cause of death, and then they'll list the jurors' names down there below at the bottom of the document. So some of the challenges I faced with processing this collection. These are 19th century records, so they're fragile, they're rare, but even then they served a utilitarian purpose during their time period. The clerks and the auditors during this time are using these. They're essentially like receipts. They're treating these like receipts. So they're folding them, they're crimping them, they're gluing them together with little wax discs, and they're even pinning them together with metal spikes. So there's holes throughout many of these documents where they folded them up, and then, like you see on an old diner, they put them on a metal spike. So you have those holes in a lot of these documents. There's multiple dates on the same form. So the date the death happened, the date the inquest happened, the date it went to the circuit court, the date it went to the auditor's office, and the date everybody got paid. There's even multiple officials being paid for the same inquest. So a lot of times those dates don't line up. That can also be very confusing. Their material was in different locations. So a lot of the stuff, when I first found it, was in county records or it was unprocessed. So instead of having it in 60 different locations, I consolidated everything and put it into one location. So to make it easier for y'all to look through. The biggest thing that I did probably for this collection was creating an index, a searchable index, so everybody can find what they want out of the collection instead of having to go through all 6 boxes and save time that way. As part of this process, I also classified each inquest. So there's a lot of unknowns in these records, and there's a lot of deaths that could be classified in multiple different ways. So a person could be shot and stabbed, for example, or a slave could be die from yellow fever in a county jail. So you could classify that any number of ways. And finally, for this slide here, there's it's 19th century records, so there's a lot of cursive, a lot of illegible handwriting. There's a lot of misspelled words, particularly proper nouns. So the names of counties are often misspelled. The names of towns are misspelled, and the names of people are very frequently misspelled, even on the same document. This example here is Madison County, 1811. So it's going to be during the territorial period. And it talks about the body of a young child found in the town of blank. So down at the bottom there, I cropped it and made it a little bit bigger. And this is an example of a city that I could not figure out what this word meant, what this word was. The writing is not great, and I soon learned, after getting a little bit of help from our reference staff, that it was Twickenham. So if you search for a town called Twickenham in Mississippi, in Madison County, you're not going to find anything because there is no Twickenham in Mississippi. But the territorial period, it also includes the modern day state of Alabama. So Twickenham is actually the first name of the town of Huntsville. So this, Mississippi territory includes both of those states, what would be both of those states. And so this document actually comes from the modern state of Alabama. So, yeah. So the importance of the documents for researchers. Really what I'm talking about here is researching death records in the 19th century. So normally you would go to the Department of Health and you would try and find a death certificate, but Mississippi didn't start doing that until 1912. And before that, you have a few other options. You can look through cemetery records, which will give you a start and an end date, but they won't have any narrative. They won't have any listing of cause of death. Generally, what people look for is newspapers and obituaries. Obituaries would be, your best bet. But there's a number of examples in these inquests where they don't show up in the newspapers. So an example of that would be infanticide, the killing of young children. Those inquests do not appear in any of the newspaper searches. Slave abuse is another category that doesn't really show up in the newspaper records at all. So this collection can be helpful to fill in some of these gaps. Then, of course, there are what's known as sexton reports. So a sexton would be a municipal official that's recording the deaths within a city. So these will be helpful for like Natchez and Vicksburg, but not really anywhere else in the state. And even then, they only have like a 1 or 2 word description of the death. They don't really have a full narrative of what happened. So that's why this collection will be of interest. And there's potential research topics for folks. Of course, the Old Southwest, Natchez Under the Hill, there's a lot of documents related to that. Antebellum society will be a big one. Violence, gun violence, I think in the 19th century would be an excellent research topic for somebody. And then, of course, slavery and race relations during the 19th century. So let's kind of go to talk about the sort of the legal background for coroners in Mississippi. Parched, sorry. So the coroner as an institution is obviously medieval in origin. It's English in origin. At least by the 12th century, you have coroners going around and investigating deaths for the king, trying to consolidate control and raise revenue for the crown. And this tradition obviously continues up until the present day. There are still coroners in the U.S. The first mention for Mississippi comes in 1799 with Sergeant's Code. Winthrop Sargent, there, pictured there, is going to be the first territorial governor. And he writes a set of laws, one of which talks about coroners. Most of what is talked about in this first law is talking about the oaths and bonds for the elected position, for the elected coroner. But there is a one-sentence description of what the jury and what the coroners are supposed to do. So it says, coroners through the use of a jury make inquiry into the deaths of any person who was slain, died suddenly, or died in prison. So that gets us through the territorial period. And then after Mississippi becomes a state in 1817, you get a law in 1822 that talks, that really fleshes out the details of what the coroners are supposed to do and the juries are supposed to do. And so you get the who, what, when, where, and why of the person and how they died, the type of instrument that's used, whether it's murder, manslaughter, misfortune, an accident, principles and accessories, and if it's a homicide case, whether it's justifiable or not. Justifiable in these examples would be a self-defense case, or if it's a peace officer shooting somebody in the line of duty. So generally that's going to be like a sheriff or a jailer shooting an escaped prisoner. That would be those examples. And a few years later, in 1824, you get another law that talks about how everything is going to be paid. So the fees, if it's a murder or manslaughter case, a violent death, will be paid out of the state judiciary. This account is also paying for a lot of salaries for local officials. So your judges, your bailiffs, your sheriffs, all of these folks are being paid out of the state judiciary account. And this is just one of the other parts of that. But if it's a accidental death or a suicide, then the county will pay for it out of the county taxes. So that's just how they split things up. And so by the 1820s, you really get everything kind of defined in terms of the law. Throughout all of the documents in this collection are based off of these two laws. There are a number of changes, but this is, the framework is already there by the 1820s. By the end of the 19th century and the early 20th century, you get a shift away from coroners and more towards medical professionals doing the death investigation. But that really doesn't happen in Mississippi until the 1980s, when they require death training as part of the requirements to be a coroner. But yeah, everything in this collection is 19th century, so we don't really have to worry about medical examiners yet. Who were the coroners? So the best example that I could find for a coroner, certainly for the territorial period, would be George Newman. He is Adams County coroner from 1807 to 1821. He's born in Massachusetts, and he moves to Mississippi around 1802. He owns a tannery and saddle shop in Natchez, and he's a prominent member of the community. He's a territorial legislator, trustee of Jefferson College. He's a member of the local board of health. He's also a ranger. So a ranger during this time period is often combined with the duties of a coroner. In many counties, you see one person doing both of these positions. And essentially, they're just rounding up stray livestock in the community. Newman was a slave owner, and he owned property near the town of Washington. And to kind of fill out his life, he is attacked in 1844 with a bludgeon by thieves on the road from Natchez to Washington. He's able to fend off the attack, but he does pass away a year later at the age of 67 from an unknown, undisclosed illness. Newman is also the coroner for the most detailed example of an inquest that we have for the territorial period. Minor Sturgis attacks Richard Wilmore in the town of Washington in 1810 with a dirk knife valued at $5. The language that's used in this inquest is familiar to a lot of other inquests. So the jury says that Sturgis, not having the fear of God before his eyes, but being moved and seduced by the instigation of the devil, did feloniously, willfully, and of the fury of his mind make an assault on the said Wilmore. So by the instigation of the devil, that's where I got this title of this presentation, but it's also common in a lot of other inquests, and it comes directly from the English system of coroners, of their inquests. So nonetheless, Sturgis attacks Wilmore with a dirk knife. He leaves a mortal wound on the left side of the head, 1 inch in breadth and 2 inches in depth. And there is a possible political connection to this incident. William B. Shields is a territorial attorney general, and he allegedly helps reduce the charge from murder to the lesser charge of manslaughter, calling Sturgis his worthy friend. Sturgis is an attorney, so there is a possible political connection here. I don't know. There's not enough evidence to go off of. I broke everything down by the years. So here we can kind of chart to see where the number of inquests are. And a few things we can say about this. They probably reflect the growth in population during this time period. So 1830s, you start to get much more larger population, so the number of inquests increase. The number of certificates, for whatever reason, we only have certificates for the 1850s, basically. I have no idea why, but those are the documents that came to me and that survived. So that, the ones in red there indicate that there's other inquests out there that have not survived. Then, of course, during the Civil War, the number of inquests drops off almost completely and then bounces right back up in Reconstruction during the 1860s. I broke everything down by gender and race for both victims and then also assailants. So there's a few things we can say here about this. The first thing is that there's a lot of unknowns. The number of unknown assailants is well over half of these inquests. Basically, the juries just didn't know who the person that committed the crime was, which tells me that it was fairly easy to get away with a murder back in the 19th century. But beyond that, there are a number of other statements that we can make. First is that, take this with a grain of salt. This is only 2,100 examples, but what I've gathered from this is that white males will be at the top here of both victims and also assailants, there. And the next category down will be black males for both victims and assailants. So I'm sure a lot of this has to do with slavery, the enforcement of the slave regime. People, they are attacking each other all the time in these documents. The next thing that we can say is that women and children are far less likely to be involved in these records. However, there are a number of cases of infanticide, a few dozen cases of infanticide, and in those cases, the mother is going to be responsible for well over half the time for those deaths. There are a few Native American inquests in these records, and if they are named, they are going to be named as Choctaw by the juries, so that perhaps it's not a surprise here in Mississippi. And there are, of course, a number of foreigners identified as victims in these inquests. And they're going to be Western European, so French, Spanish, Italian, English, Irish, and then German/Prussian. There's no clear definition of, how long they were here in Mississippi, or if they were recent arrivals, or if they're just recent immigrants, or if they are even actually what they say the jury is. A lot of times they're just trying to describe an unknown person. So, they could not even be Spanish or Prussian or whatever it is. I broke everything down by county. So the southwest portion of the state is going to have the most. Natchez and Adams County and Vicksburg and Warren County will be at the top. That's probably not a surprise. The next tier down, we have the orange color there. So Yazoo, Hines, Claiborne, and Wilkinson. And then, of course, in the northeast portion of the state, you have a few counties as well: Tishomingo, Monroe, and Lowndes. Just like with the Twickenham example, there are a few inquests from outside of the state of Mississippi, basically in Alabama. So there's about 8 inquests from Mobile during the territorial period. And of course, these inquests stop in 1869. So I have no idea why there's not any inquests after that period. But any counties that are formed after 1869 are not going to be in these records, of course. I broke everything down by the physical location of where the bodies were. A few statements that I can make about this is, again, unknown or not stated is going to be at the top for these inquests. But a next thing that I can say is that people are dying where they're spending most of their time. That's probably pretty intuitive. So house of residence is at the top, city or town, on the streets of the city or town, or a person's property. Another theme in these records would be transportation. So we have Mississippi River is going to play a big role. People are, there's steamboat wrecks and people are drowning in those and floating downriver, and then Natchez at the landing, they have to basically figure out who this person was based on what clothing they are wearing. Plantation, again, slavery is going to play a big role in these records. Roads to and from towns, businesses like sawmills, jails, hospitals, hotels, railroads, courthouses, etc. I broke everything down by cause of death. So unknown, again, is going to be the top category. But right behind that would be gunshots, and sharp instruments will be like knives. We'll talk about these in a second, but in more detail. But violence, blows with fists, miscellaneous objects, slave abuse, murders, drownings, infanticides, suicides, lynchings, illnesses, jail, on and on. So the leading category, of course, is going to be unknown causes, and there's a number of possible reasons for this. Before 1822, of course, you have a very simplistic part of description in the law, so the juries didn't really have to give many details. Again, in the 1850s, we see all these juror certificates, so that's going to throw off our numbers. There's limited evidence that they're dealing with, that the juries are dealing with during this time period. And of course, there's a lack of forensic science and a lack of forensic tools. That, this isn't CSI, where they have, video cameras recording 24/7. This is a lot of witness testimonies that could be unreliable. And there is no examples in this collection, but it is possible that there was corruption involved. Cities like Boston had problems where coroners were making up numbers, fudging the numbers, and collecting the money for deaths that didn't actually occur. So it is possible that some folks were just trying to defraud the government. Okay, so let's talk about some of the examples. The first category outside of the unknowns will be gunshots. They will always talk about the type of gun that's used, whether it's a pistol, a shotgun, a rifle. They will also talk about other types of rarer guns, muskets, cane guns, revolvers. There's one with a Colt repeater as well. They will often talk about the type of projectile used. So a ball is usually what they talk about, or a leaden ball. Sometimes they'll say mini ball, squirrel shot, buckshot, that kind of a thing. And again, if you're interested in gun violence research, this would be the category to look at. So let's talk about a few examples of these inquests. The first one is a famous example, William Johnson, Adams County, 1851. He, of course, is the well-known barber and free person of color, and he writes his antebellum diary that is very famous, and you can read it online today if you really want to. He, of course, is assassinated by Baylor Wynn, who was a neighbor and also a person of color. This inquest talks about the location of where he was shot, about 3.5 miles from Natchez, and where in the body he was killed. So, gun or pistol shot in the right breast, which penetrated the right lobe of his lungs and came out through his back. This is, of course, a very well-known example, and there's a lot more details elsewhere. The newspapers of the day will have a lot more description. The diary has an excellent introduction that talks about this detail. But this is such a famous example that I figured we had to at least mention it. This is an example that is not found anywhere else from what I can tell. This is Bolivar County, 1856, Jordan. This would be an attempted slave insurrection. So I can't find this in newspapers. I can't find this in court records. I can't find this anywhere else in secondary sources or anything. So essentially what happens is Charles Rice is the overseer. He's walking through the slave quarters one day, and the slaves attack him with axes and farming tools and hoes and implements like that. He fends off the attacks and runs into the house, a house, I'm not sure which one, and gets his gun. And he, according to the inquest, he says, "There's one of them damn rascals." He points it at Jordan. They fight over the gun. He's able to wrestle it away from Jordan. Jordan tries to run away, and Charles Rice, the overseer, shoots him in the back of the shoulder, killing him almost instantly. So yeah, there's a lot of documents that haven't seen the light of day in this collection and will be of interest to researchers, I'm sure. The next category we have is of sharp instruments. This is going to be a whole lot of different types of knives, basically, sharp tools and implements. So you have pocket knife, bowie knife, butcher's knives, shoemaker's knives, hunting knives, also dirks, sword canes, handspikes. I included farming tools and implements in here because of the sharp edge, so axes, garden hoes, and hatchets. Here we have, so these two examples I picked because of the location is unique to these inquests. This first example is the only inquest to happen at a college. So this is another pretty famous example. Dr. Jeremiah Chamberlain, Claiborne County, 1851. He's the president of Oakland College. And he is killed by George A. Briscoe, who is a local resident neighbor who was allegedly drunk. They got into an argument, and Briscoe stabs Chamberlain, who was the president of the college, stabs him and kills him, according to this inquest, immediately. In other sources, it says that he took some time to pass away. But the argument, it's been suggested that the argument was over slavery because Chamberlain was a unionist and opposed to the expansion of slavery. The next example is the only inquest that we have for a church. So this is at the Okolona Baptist Church in Chickasaw County in 1853. We have Isaac Newton Knowles. He is a teacher at the church. I'm not sure what kind. I don't think it's a Sunday school teacher. It could be like a tutoring type situation. But nonetheless, Thomas Gill is his student. He's age 15 or 16 at the time. And Gill walks into the classroom wearing a hat. And the teacher asks him to remove the hat. The student refuses, they get into an argument, and the student stabs him in the chest and kills him within a few minutes. Gill flees the scene, and the governor issues a proclamation, but that's kind of where the story ends. I'm not sure if Gill is arrested or what happens after this fact. There is a newspaper article that talks about how Gill is the son of a wealthy individual from Tennessee, and that Knowles is a struggling teacher trying to provide for his family. So there is sort of an economic narrative here. But yeah, that's the only example at a church. Miscellaneous objects. These are going to be anything that's not a gun or a knife, basically. So sticks, whips, clubs, poles, paddles, switches, walking sticks, brick bats, which would be like pieces of brick, explosive devices, glass decanter, planks, slingshots, and brass knuckles. I also included some of the deaths from strangulation just because of the type of object that was used. So a rope, suspenders, and strips of cloth or gingham. Those last ones are for infants. So that's obviously very tragic and sad. So some examples of miscellaneous. Lars Peter Lowe, Harrison County, 1849. This is unique in all of these inquests, and I'm sure very unique in throughout the country. I don't know of any other example of this. This would be of an explosive device being used to kill somebody. So Lars Peter Lowe dies from a wound inflicted by the explosion of a pine block charged with gunpowder placed at the doorsteps of Miss Roselle's. He dies from the wound inflicted on the right side of his head, about 3 inches above the right ear. I can't find anything about these people in the historical sources. So nothing on Lowe, doesn't appear in the newspaper records. They don't appear in census records, court records. But I welcome anybody to find more information on this one, because explosive devices has to be a pretty rare occurrence in 1849. This next example I chose because of it's one Choctaw killing another Choctaw, so I thought that might be of interest. This is Tisho, in Neshoba County, 1843. He is killed by Pasabi, or Bill Frank, in the town of Dixon. And basically, a lot of these miscellaneous ones are people killing each other with things that are lying nearby. So Tisho was killed with a piece of timber about 2 feet long, causing 2 mortal wounds on the back part of the head. And, it also broke his skull. But yeah, so there's that one. The next category is going to be blows with fists. This will be punching and kicking without the use of a tool or a weapon. This example, John Coventry, Rankin County, 1856. He's an Englishman and employed as working at a stable somewhere, probably in Brandon, but I'm not sure. And an unknown person associated with John Robinson's circus comes up to him and argues with him and cusses him out, and then kicks him in the stomach, and Coventry dies from his wounds 3 days later. Someone associated with the circus, Jim Gregory, is arrested but released due to a lack of evidence. Again, lending credence to this idea that it was pretty easy to get away with a murder during this time period. This next example will be one where 2 slaves kill another slave. So I thought that might be of interest. So Richard, Hines County, 1840, he is killed by an unknown slave, and then also Henderson, who is named as an accessory to the murder. There's some good details in here talking about how this happens on the road leading from Tomlinson's to Utica near the house of William Mims. And he dies from being murdered by beating his skull being beaten so that it broke in several places and his brains, quote unquote, spilled out. After this event, the town is so outraged that they tried to lynch Henderson. And he, basically the executor of the estate has to take Henderson out of the state, out of Mississippi. And he goes down to New Orleans and he sells him down in New Orleans. This next this next category would be slave abuse. So again, another description, another category of showcasing the brutality of human nature. This would be Elias, a slave in Adams County, 1859. I chose this one because it's connected to a second one we'll talk about in a second, but also because of the level of violence. It kind of reminded me of something like a Tarantino film. You know, it's just that violent. But nonetheless, Elias is essentially whipped to death. So he's whipped for several hours with 9 cowhides tied together and a sole leather strop. And he's confined in stocks with his feet tied to the floor. He's also waterboarded. The owner, Stephen Odell, and another slave basically hold him up and pour about a gallon of water into his face. So that is obviously horrific. But then also Stephen Odell, and 3 years later, the owner, is himself a victim in one of these inquests. So in 1862, he is murdered. Stephen Odell is a wealthy individual in Natchez. He's a gunsmith. This is a Derringer. It's an example of one of his guns that he built. And one night he dies from the wounds to the back of his head by a blunt instrument, such as a sledgehammer or a heavy bar, while he was sleeping by some unknown person. The mayor of Natchez offers a $1,000 reward for information leading to the capture of this individual, but from what I can tell, nothing is resolved. In my mind, this is a payback for the waterboarding and torture of Elias 3 years later, or 3 years previous, but that's just my speculation. So the next one, another brutal category, and sorry, this isn't exactly a happy topic, but we'll get through it. So infanticide would be infants generally, but also children under the age of 14. This next one is pretty brutal. The infant child of Thomas Nations, Lawrence County, 1843, comes to his death by having hot lead or pewter poured down his throat by violence, which is incredibly graphic. I can't really find much more information on this one. There's no indication as to who exactly committed this. Is it somebody in the family? Is it a neighbor? Is it a friend? Is it a random person off the street? There's just no resolution to this. But Nations does pop up in the census records, and he does have a bunch of kids. So that's something at least. This next example would be of a mother killing her children. So James, Joseph, and Elias in Copiah County, 1830. This is fairly early in terms of our records. But the inquest reads that Dinah did carry the said James, Joseph, and Elias to a certain creek and did voluntarily and feloniously strangle, murder, and drown the said children. So, again, horrific and terrible and tragic. But this raises all sorts of questions about why somebody would do this kind of thing. Do they not want them growing up in slavery? There's a million different questions we can pose. Lynchings, another brutal category. Lynchings are often thought of as a late 19th or 20th century phenomenon, but there are a number of ones that are occurring in the antebellum period as well. And this example is the most detailed example in all of these inquests, and it has a lot of good information. So Dave Gridley is a slave in Rankin County, 1843. And allegedly, he is breaking into houses and causing a ruckus in the community. He flees, and the town gets somebody from Madison County to bring down their dogs, and they hunt him down and bring Gridley back to the town of Brandon. And they bring him back to the grocery store of Andrew Given in the town of Brandon. The way the inquest reads, the jurors state that the candles were blown out and Gridley was taken from the store and hanged from a shanty or a shack about 150 yards from the store. He's then thrown into, he's then burned and thrown into the shack or the shanty. Some also describe it as a barn. So that aspect of it is obviously horrific. But then there's also some other details about from the witness testimonies, which is also very rare. So you get both sides of the perspective on lynching from this time period. So Thomas Wilkinson, for example, goes on record as saying that he's opposed to the execution of Gridley without having a legal trial. Of course, the opposite is also there. So Dr. S.M. Puckett says that he is in favor of lynchings given in this case, and also he even mentions one that happens in Hillsborough from Scott County several years ago, which I can't find any reference to that lynching as well in the in the historical record. So obviously this stuff is likely happening much more frequently than what is known. Suicides, there's a few examples in here. This one I just picked one. It's John, Adams County, 1856, a slave of Albert Dunbar. He's in the Adams County jail, and he essentially hangs himself with a silk handkerchief and suspenders fastened to one of the bars of the said jail. I can't find much else information on this, but I'm sure it would be of interest to some folks. Violence and murder. This is a category, these are two categories that are very vague. Almost all of them have like no information, no description, except for one example. And this is a very detailed example that is also a very tragic example. This would be Martha Williams, Kemper County, 1868. She is a young lady in her 20s. She's at her family home in Scuba, Mississippi, and she has dinner with her family, and then the next morning, her mother finds her hanging from, it's described in the inquest as a hawk of thread. I'm not sure if that's supposed to be a hook of thread. You know, it's kind of a vague phrase. I don't really understand what exactly they're trying to convey there. But it's made to look as if she had committed suicide. They do a postmortem examination within 24 to 36 hours. And the doctor rules that she likely did not commit suicide because based on the bruising on her neck was not consistent with the hanging. It also mentions that she was violated prior to her death. So this is the only example that we have of a sexual assault happening in any of these records out of the 2,100 cases. So there's also other witnesses who testify. The neighbor doesn't believe that it was a suicide just based on the young lady's personality. The father is distraught, and he talks about how the body was removed to a neighbor's house during the interim. There's no explanation as to why. There's a lot of uncertainty in a lot of these records. And then the mother talks about having to remove the body, take the body down, and how her bedroom was in disarray. So that's very tragic as well. A next category would be illnesses and alcohol. These are often combined. Alcohol is often a contributing factor in a lot of these deaths. So for example, we have Frank, Yazoo County, 1849. He dies from apoplexy brought on by liquor that he had taken by himself and was forced upon him to take by Lewis G. Ross. This is another example where I can't find any information on anybody in here. So I welcome any researcher to find more, please. This next category, these categories are kind of combined just in the interest of time. Nature, falls from horses and hills and things like that, and then drowning. This next example is a very famous case. This would be Duncan Skinner. He is an overseer in Adams County, 1857. He, according to the inquest, the jury gets it completely wrong. They say that he was out hunting and he fell from his horse, and in falling, he had actually broken his neck. Later investigation reveals that it was actually the slaves who had gone into his cabin or his room, murdered him in the early hours of the morning, and then taken him out into the woods and staged it as if it was a hunting accident. There's a whole lot of more detail of this. There's a book, Death of an Overseer by Michael Wayne, that's excellent, and I recommend everybody take a look if you're interested. The next example here, again, there's a lot of uncertain unknowns in these records. So we have the crash or the wreck of Steamboat Monroe, Adams County, 1854. Basically, there's the steamboat wrecks on the 27th of March, and this person floats down the river for over a month, and the jury in Natchez basically has to try to figure out who this person was based on the clothing on their backs. So he had on a check shirt, satinette pantaloons, and brogan shoes. Poisoning, and we're getting low on time, but there's two types of poisons that are used, strychnine and arsenic. So an example here, Albert Johnson is killed by his slaves, Tom and Randall, with strychnine administered in whiskey. And work-related, we have Prince, Adams County, 1854. He's driving an ox team into Natchez, and according to the inquest, he falls asleep, and he falls off the wagon and is crushed by one of the wagon wheels. So that's pretty much everything. We have, if you're interested in this topic, I know it's kind of a morose topic, but there's a lot of other states that have these types of collections. And one of the best professors, certainly, that I've seen talking about this topic is Dr. Stephen Berry out of the University of Georgia. He's done, I think, Virginia and South Carolina, but he has a website called CSI Dixie, and he's got YouTube lectures online and stuff. So I recommend everybody check that out. That's everything I have. Thank you. Yeah.
Shaun, we had a question from our live stream. What was one of the things that you found as you were processing the collection that maybe was the most surprising or shocking as you were kind of going through this processing? Yeah, that's a good question. So the Gridley example was the brutality of it, the level of detail, that's described in these things is pretty great. If you read, there's a newspaper clipping about that incident, but it doesn't have the level of detail that's in this inquest. The other one would be the explosive device. The reference staff really got a kick out of trying to figure out that one, and it's certainly an interesting way to go. Yeah.
How did the police and the coroner work together? Are they friends? Are they enemies? Are they both looking for money?
Yeah, that's good. So the legal part of this is that the coroner and the sheriff are often set as sort of counterbalancing each other. So the coroner will have certain duties, the justice of the peace will have certain duties, the constable, the sheriff. It's by design that they're kind of set up. Not adversarially, but opposed to one another. The sheriffs are not doing the death investigation during this time period. There's not detectives yet. That's a 20th century phenomenon. So yeah, I mean, it's the coroners and it's really the jury doing all the investigation, all the work. The medical doctors are obviously providing any medical expertise. I can't imagine people were reading anatomy textbooks as jurors. So I'm sure it's, they're relying on the local doctors.
Shaun, you've got another one back here.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you for an excellent talk, Shaun.
Thanks,
My
bro.
question is, could this collection be a useful resource for people doing genealogical research?
Yeah, so definitely. I've had a few patrons, professors wanting to look through this record because of, the documents related to slavery. But then there's, African-American research can be difficult during the 19th century due to slavery. So this will help with that. But then people are very knowledgeable about their genealogical research. And I can think of one patron that was helping me to correct some of these records, certainly my index of some of these records due to the spelling of the name. So they were able to help me out with that information. So Yeah, if you know that there was a death in the family in the 19th century, you can definitely try and get in touch with me, and I'll find the answer.
Got another one back here, Shaun.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Excellent presentation. Thank you much.
Thank you.
I was just wondering, your presentation covers a long period, roughly just over 1800 through to about 1860s, roughly.
Mhm.
And during that time, Mississippi, at the early part, Mississippi was a territory. And then around 1820, something like around there, it becomes a state. So I'm wondering if what difference did it make in terms of when it was a territory as opposed to when it was a state? Was there any difference in terms of any when an inquest or whatever it is when that happened?
Yeah, that's great.
When it went to the territory as opposed to when it was a state, what was the difference when it became a state as
Yeah.
opposed to when it was a territory?
So the big difference would be the inclusion of inquests like in the modern boundaries of Alabama. So there's some that are outside during the territorial period. But even then, just the documents themselves after the 1820s and by the 1830s, they've become much more descriptive. So a lot of these that I picked today were from the 1850s because they're more descriptive, there's more information, and so there's a lot more to work with. But yeah, they do become more, I don't want to say more interesting, but they do sort of become more interesting as the decades progress with this collection.
Just one follow-up.
Yeah.
How much lying did the coroners do? Like, are they setting up slaves? Are they saying this happened and it never did? Because it just seemed like it'd be the perfect cover-up, and there's no detective yet. So where are we at that part? How many lies are going on?
I mean, there's no way to answer that really. I mean, it's a good question though, because we don't know exactly what's happening during these inquests. It's all the jurors are going to be white males. All the coroners are going to be white males. All the local officials will be white males. So beyond what they tell us, there's really nothing we can prove without other types of sources, and we just don't have them really. Yeah.
I'm wondering how else can this data be used, and is it continuing to today? I'm thinking about so much data that's being collected now, especially with the concern about data centers, but it is possible to collect a lot more information that is readable, and is someone doing this now?
Yeah, that's good. So how this collection can be used, there's professors, grad students. There was a grad student that was looking at this collection because of the infanticide cases, so they wanted to write a thesis about that or a dissertation about that. Professors will want the documents if they're interested in slavery. They'll want to try and collect all this information to make some type of argument. A lot of times it's presented as I won't say that, but basically there's a lot more violence in these documents than I think is in the historical literature. There's a lot more lynchings happening. There's a lot more of slaves fighting owners and overseers and vice versa. So that type of dynamic would be an interesting discussion for sure.
And one thing I will say is here at the Department of Archives and History, a part of the government records is the collection of these continuation of records that we have today, but also these historic ones. One of our regulars, Ms. Primer, helps the pre-processing, I guess you will. So Kevin, will you explain a little bit of that process from a government record standpoint?
Okay, from a government record standpoint, we are governed by the Mississippi Code 25 2559-1 through 2559-31, and that's the Archives and Records Management Law of 1981, which makes it any state agency or entity has to come through our division and our section in order to legally dispose of any records. And what we do is we develop a records retention schedule working with the state agencies, and we looked at certain needs of the records. And from that and working with the state agencies, then the records retention schedule go to the State Records Committee, and the State Records Committee chairman is the executive director of the Mississippi Department of Archives and History, and that person is the director. And then we have a representative from the governor's office, the Secretary of State, the Department of Health, and the auditor's office. And once those schedules are voted on and approved, then the retention is the illegal retention of that record. And if they are historical, once the agency has no use for them, according to the retention, they will go to Shaun. If the agency need a temporary facility to hold them in, and if they're not historical, they go to the State Records Center. And the section of the code dealing with the duties of the State Records Committee is 2559-7. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Part of the incredible work that happens here at the Department of Archives and History that helps what it takes for 6 boxes to show up in Shaun's office, and then for us to continue to learn. And the hope is that researchers will come and continue to use our space, and hopefully platforms like History's Lunch to be an entry to so many opportunities and research availability next door at the Department of Archives and History in the William F. Winter Building. We're so thankful to have you guys with us. Let's give Shaun another round of applause. Again, we hope to see you back next week. The plan is to have Caroline Bain with us next week in her presentation on Just Tonight and the WLBT story in Medgar Evers' speech. So we hope to see you back next week. Check us out on Facebook and other social media for confirmation of that event. But we look forward to seeing you guys next week for History's Lunch.